Welcome to episode 124 of the Untangled Faith podcast. Today I'll be sharing some reflections on the 4-year anniversary of the publication of Religion News Service article, "Is Dave Ramsey's Empire the Best Place to Work in America? Say no, and you're out." I'll also be sharing a portion of a conversation I had with my friend Heather Fulk, who chose to go on the record for that article. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Amy Fritz, and you're listening to the Untangled Faith podcast, a podcast for anyone who has found themselves confused or disillusioned in their faith journey. If you want to hold on to your faith while untangling it from all that is not good or true, this is the place for you. Hi guys, today's episode will be a combination of my own personal reflections and portions of a conversation that I recorded with my friend Heather Fulk. This week marks the 4-year anniversary of the publication of religion journalist Bob Smietana's article, "Is Dave Ramsey's Empire the Best Place to Work in America? Say no, and you're out." I wanted to share some of the behind-the-scenes experience of deciding to go on the record for Bob, take a look at the article and the Ramsey response to request for comment to see how they both held up or didn't. I also want to share a summary of things that have happened since January 2021, as well as how I'm feeling about Dave and the whole entire Ramsey Solutions organization these days. I'll start by sharing how the RNS article came together. On Thursday, January 14, 2021, while I was helping teach a class of second graders at our homeschool tutorial, I received a series of text messages from a friend. I'll call her Kate. That's not her real name. Kate was texting me to let me know that she had heard from a friend who worked at Ramsey with a heads up that there was going to be a scathing article that was coming out the next day, and that friend was under the impression that it was going to list a bunch of current and former employees of the company. Kate's friend went on to say that from the stage, they addressed the fact that this article would point out breaches in their core values, and went on to explain that away to the employees by saying, "There are sometimes exceptions when core values are violated, depending on the breach." If you're new to this podcast, you may not recognize that reference. Ramsey Solutions has long espoused a stated core value of righteous living that included fidelity to your spouse. In Dave's Entre Leadership book, he has said he would fire people who had cheated on their spouses. His words in that book are, quote, "If your spouse can't trust you, I can't trust you," unquote. I don't remember exactly what I said in response to Kate's text. I probably typed back something like, "Wow," or "Yikes." What I didn't tell Kate was that I wasn't surprised an article was coming out because I had been instrumental in making that article happen, and that this was the second article I had helped facilitate. I've done a series of podcast episodes about our experience with the Ramsey organization, and you can go back and listen to them if you're interested. I'll link them in the show notes. Those will give you more context to what all led up to that moment. But the too long didn't read version is that after my husband resigned from Ramsey Solutions, a year later, I publicly wrote about the reasons on my website. And that triggered several journalists to reach out to me to ask if we would be interested in sharing our story on the record. At the time, I declined because the Ramsey organization had threatened us with a cease and desist letter, strongly suggesting that they were going to take legal action against us. For what? I can't tell you. We hadn't violated any legally binding agreement, and they had reached out to Nathan's employer to put pressure on them. We were concerned about the impact on our friends and Nathan's employer, so we declined. But I kept paying attention and praying and thinking through what the right thing would be for us to do or say, and by that fall, about 6 months later, I'd gathered enough documentation that I believed it was time to reach out to one of those journalists. So that's when I reached out to Religion News Service journalist Bob Smietana. Journalists never share who their sources are unless the sources agree to be named. So I don't know who the sources were for the first article Bob published in December of 2020, but I do know that one main source of damning information on Ramsey was Dave Ramsey himself. He had a daily radio show / podcast with hours of his own words recorded and shared with the whole world. I pointed Bob to Dave's own words, and I told several trusted friends that Bob was working on an article and looking for documentation or folks that would be willing to talk to him. I didn't ask after that what they did with that information. So I didn't know who else might be talking to Bob or what information they had, and I liked it that way. I still like it that way. When I read the December article, it was clear to me that someone inside the company, or very recently inside the company, had given information to Bob, and I hadn't talked to anyone who was currently working inside the Ramsey org. That was the article that referenced a recording of Dave referring to $8 an hour workers as twerps. It received a lot of attention. Again, I will link that in the show notes. Meanwhile, as Bob was finishing up that article, I had set up a time to meet with him about the possibility of working with him on another article, a bigger article, the one that he ended up publishing in January 2021. We sat outside, social distancing, and I shared with him the documentation that I had. What we needed now was for someone to be willing to go on the record with their name. We needed several someones, and we didn't have that yet. So again, I shared with some trusted friends that we needed someone to go on the record, and I waited and I prayed. Several days into praying, I sat down with Nathan, my husband, and said, I thought I should go on the record. Someone needs to go first, I suggested. I figured if I did that, Bob could tell folks they wouldn't be the only one. That might make somebody else willing to speak with him. I knew it would be a risk. We knew it would be a risk. But I figured I would call Ramsey's bluff. I suspected we had already experienced the worst of what they would throw at us. So I texted Bob and told him I would do it. And then I called my friend Heather. Their family had a story too. Her husband had been fired because of something Heather had posted on her personal Facebook page. Someone who was a friend of hers on Facebook, imagine air quotes around the word friend, shared what she posted, and John was initially just reprimanded. But sometime later, he was fired. Heather hadn't mentioned the name of her husband's employer in this post. She simply expressed some frustration with the company's decision to discontinue the work-from-home option when it was early in the COVID pandemic with so much uncertainty. When I reached out to Heather, she was eager to tell her story, and she ultimately decided to go on the record. Here's part of a conversation I recorded with Heather about her decision-making process. So you were given the opportunity to go on the record with a journalist. What did you feel like was the right thing for you to do?
Well, okay, that's interesting, though, because for Bob, it felt like the right thing to do.
Just chiming in here to say that when Heather says Bob, she's referring to veteran religion news journalist Bob Smetana. Yeah.
There were a couple of other people that reached out, and it did not feel like the right thing to do. So it wasn't like I just need to say something to anybody who will give me a space to say it. Bob felt like the right space to say it.
Yeah.
So for Bob, that was like, it felt like a respectful, safe place to say out loud what only I could say, because there was already a narrative out there. So you have to counteract the narrative if someone's talking about you. And I feel like it was really important to be like factual. Like, this is what happened. So if you want to know the other side of the story, like, here's the other side of the story. And we had not, signed an NDA. So I personally did not have fear of retribution, because I was just telling a story that was true. And if you don't like that story, like, maybe you shouldn't have done it. Just saying.
That's interesting, because I was just looking at Bob's had posted something about getting started as a journalist recently. He posted this on Twitter, and his journey in choosing that career and people that gave him a chance. And one person that replied to him was Beth Moore, who said, I'm so thankful. Like, basically she was grateful and had been impacted for the better because he decided to go down that path as his career path. And so both you and Beth decided to tell your story to Bob.
Yeah, I don't know why. I think he he came recommended, so that was good. But I think, knowing the first time he talked to me and John was, not wanting to go on the record, and he was like, I'm not going to do anything you don't want to do. So being able to, I think, hold the space for me, and I think for John too, but I was already like, I'm in, but being able to hold the space of, I'm going to listen, and if you don't want me to do anything with it, I'm not going to pressure you. That's a big deal. You know what I mean? Because there was definitely pressure from a couple other sources, and I was like, I don't think this feels good, And they backed off when I said no, but it felt a little like, we'd really like to hear what you have to say. We'd really like to hear what you have to say. Bob didn't feel that way. And that was a big deal to me, I think.
So I mentioned earlier that we had technical difficulties the first time we had this conversation. But it did give me time to think through some of the things that you had said that we'll talk more about, and just about how you exist in the world and what you value. And I see you as someone who deeply values authenticity. And not that other people don't, but some people, it is a really big deal. And I see that in you as I know you as a person and as I hear you talk. So how did that impact your decision-making process? I'm assuming it did.
Yeah, I'm an Enneagram 4, so authenticity is a big deal to me. And I don't think people realize, because I was thinking about our conversation too, and like bouncing it off of John on a walk yesterday, how much people in general really want authenticity. I guess I just felt like it was really important going on the record to be heard and seen for who I was. Yeah, I feel like that felt really important. And I am like an open book. You want to know? Just ask. I'll tell you. Probably too much. I won't probably tell you too much. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, it really bothered me knowing there were narratives out there of me that were not true. Particularly, again, I'm like beating a dead horse, but like particularly narratives that suggest that I don't care about people or I'm out to get people, because that's probably not caring about people is probably the furthest reality of mine. Like I probably cared too much. And so that really bothered me. Like, nope, you need to know who I really am on this side. Some people don't care, but I totally do. And I think it leaves then open space, if you're authentic, for people to say, I can talk about that with you too, because you said it out loud first. And now I have a safe space to say, yep, I can say that too. Whether I signed an NDA or even if it was just like, I need to talk it out. You know what I mean? So I think authenticity in general is just such a valuable asset. It can be difficult to be an authentic person, but I think more people want to be authentic or be in community with authentic people than we realize.
Some people, when they're at this crossroads, they've never been at a place where they have the, I don't know if the word is privilege or the benefit, maybe the benefit of being able to think through this in a way that they're really under the radar. Nobody even knows who they are or anything about them or that they're going to do something or not do something. And, and most of us make big decisions that don't impact a lot of people and don't end up in the news, which is wonderful.
Yes.
But in your case, you were already sort of experiencing some of the worst case scenario of what could happen if you cross somebody. Mm-hmm. How did that impact your decision making?
I mean, this is the reality of the situation. Still currently the reality of the situation. We took out some sort of insurance policy, I don't know, at the very wise counsel of a dear friend who's on the other end of the screen.
Oh, yeah, we have umbrella policies. Yes.
Yes, the umbrella policy. We took it out just as a safeguard because Dave is litigious, and so we took it out just in case. But I just kind of figured, not only is there not a whole lot you can do to me, because I'm not lying about you, and I'm not slandering you, and I'm not going to tell falsities. Like, I'm not going to do that. But at some point, I really just have to trust that Jesus is big enough to take it if you do come after me. And I have always carried that. Like when we got our cease and desist letter, I was like, come at me, bruh. Like, what are you going to do? I'm not doing anything wrong. And I got Jesus. So like, let's do this. Like, mano a mano. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So, but also I do feel like besides the umbrella policy, I just really felt like I'm not doing anything wrong. And this is just and right. And I think God honors that. And so I'm just going to trust that he's going to take care of the rest.
Yeah.
But once I have decided there is an injustice, it's very difficult to be held back. And you are under no illusion that you can control this spouse, right?
That's right. That comment Heather is making about not being able to be controlled is a reference to a deposition given by Dave Ramsey in June of 2023. I'll read the corresponding portion to you. Here is what Dave Ramsey said under oath. I'll start with Dave's statement where he says, about the Fulks, quote, they were criticizing the company, and if you want to destroy the place where your spouse works, we don't need you on our team. The questioning attorney responded and said, but the spouse wasn't on your team. To that, Dave said, the person I fired was on my team, and they were collecting a check from me. The attorney, and you expect those people to control their spouses? Later on, Dave answers, I can't control someone, and I can't control their spouse. Only thing I can control is whether they work for us or not. The attorney says, so by firing the employee is an attempt of you to control the spouse's actions? Dave answers, no. I have no illusion. I could control that spouse.
I
No
swear
truer words.
I'm getting a shirt if y'all want merch.
This is the spouse that could not be
That's
controlled.
right.
You touched on this briefly before, but tell me about how your faith influenced your decision.
I mean, I felt like I am very justice minded. So I felt like it was important, besides setting a record straight about me personally, that people see that there's a wolf among them. I think that's important. And what people do with that information, I respect completely. You got to do what you got to do. I, again, have a really intense justice mindset. So, like, if I know there's someone, whoever, I don't care who it is, wounding believers and non-believers who bears the name of Jesus, I want to know, because I don't want to be affiliated with that. And maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's cancel culture, but that's just who I am. I felt like it was really important for people to know that this person and company who's representing Christ, like, this is the behavior of the person that says they're representing Christ. Because it wasn't just me. Like, there were lots of other people hidden in the background that probably had worse things done even than I did. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think it's really important that we tell the truth. I think Paul's pretty clear that if someone is called out for their behavior, which had happened in this situation, personally, publicly, with several people, every way the scripture says to be called out, and they refuse to repent, like, we should not be supporting that. And I think if you know those steps have been taken and that we're dealing with an abuser, then you have to say something. You have to be a voice, even if people refuse to believe it and people will, still support it. That's not my judgment to make, but I think it is important that I say something. And so that, I think, was really important, felt really important to me.
Yeah, that resonates with me, because I feel like if this was any just random person claiming to run a for-profit secular organization that has nothing to do with Jesus, it would feel different than somebody who claims that the whole thing is about honoring the Lord and makes a big deal about that. Okay, I want to circle back to something about, you had said you were pretty clear early on, or at least that's my impression. Like, you wanted to speak. When you were given the opportunity to go on the record, you're like, I think I'm going to do this. Yeah. It wasn't like, should I or shouldn't I? Like, it was like, yeah, I want to do this. And I think some people may assume, because you were pretty clear on what you wanted to do, that it was easy or not scary, or like, this is just a smooth process. Would you like to correct the record on that?
No, it was not a smooth process. I mean, it was not easy. It was definitely frightening. I held at the time both this resolve that God would protect us and we were doing the right thing, with, oh my word, but what if? What if something happens? And people that love Jesus go through hard things all the time. So, like, what if, And so, there was still a mourning of, like, even though those friends weren't really friends that I lost, it was still a lost season, because we, lost a church, which wasn't a huge disappointment, but it was still our church community for a while, and friends within the church community. And so there was still that, like, I don't know, there's a sense of loss anytime you decide I'm going to be the one, because not everyone's going to believe you, or if they do believe you, they're going to think you did the wrong thing. Like, see, she just can't quit talking. And I think my situation was unique in that the thing that got me in trouble in the first place was sharing what I thought. So, like, are people just going to think, that girl just needs to shut up, nobody cares? Like, she got her husband into this in the first place. Like, she just needs to stop talking. So I think there was a lot of that too. Like, I'm going to do it, but the misconceptions are going to be out there, and I'm going to have to deal with that. So yeah, definitely. No, it's definitely not easy. And giving your story to someone and then they get to tailor it. So, like, what's he going to put in there? What's he not going to put in there? I think there's really important things to put in there. Is he going to do, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? That's hard. Like, that's hard. So, it wasn't like a cakewalk by any means. And the fun part is, after the article, I think it was after the article came out, maybe it was even before, I don't know, maybe it was after, I'm gonna have to fact check this, but John got offered a job because people heard what he did, and, like, not signing an NDA and walking away and all that stuff. And, like, he's like, yeah, I don't want it, but thank you, because he had a job at that point, but thank you. Good things can sometimes come out of going first. Things you don't expect to come out of it,
That's good. I want to end on that. Now for a quick break. Now back to the show. So no, I was not surprised when my friend Kate texted me with the heads up about an article coming out the next day on January 15th. On Friday morning, the 15th, I sat in front of my laptop and found a cached version of the article Bob was publishing that day. And not long after that, the article went live. As I read it, I noticed that in addition to Heather and me, another woman had gone on the record. Every person brave enough to use their name publicly was a woman. That is not lost on me. I don't think there's been enough focus on this. I'm certain there were a lot of good men who helped behind the scenes, but it was women who were willing to use their names. If you followed the reporting in real time, you know what happened next. The article itself was solid reporting. No conjecture. Bob brought receipts and mentioned them in the article. But as good as that article was, there was another written piece that overshadowed it a bit. And it was something written by the Ramsey organization. It was an email sent from the publicity email account that replied to Bob's request for comment. Religion News Service editors chose to publish it and link to it from the main article. People are still talking about it 4 years later. Just last week, I asked online if anybody remembered their reaction to it when it first came out, and Richard Clark responded with, quote, "One of the most epic self-owns in all of evangelicalism," end quote. I have screenshots of some of the ways people process that response online. Mark Kellner wrote on Facebook, "As a reporter, I've gone toe-to-toe with all kinds of people and organizations. Never, not once have I ever had an email like the one my friend Bob Smetana got from Dave Ramsey's crew." To prep for this podcast episode, I read the Ramsey response again, as well as the main article, because I think it's good to occasionally look back and ask, how did this hold up? And did this really happen? Or was it really that bad? News cycles move fast, and sometimes you forget or are just left with a vague recollection that something really weird happened. So I read that response from Ramsey first because it was written before the RNS article was published. According to numerous reports from former employees and the words in the email itself, we know this was a response sent to all the current Ramsey employees, and those employees were encouraged to reach out to Bob and basically harass him. The tone of the email is sarcastic and cruel. In that email, Bob is referred to as a freelance reporter. They also claim he weaved together a series of half-truths. Now, this is what they chose to write in response to the questions that Bob had sent to them in advance of the article being printed. They had a chance to correct anything they claimed wasn't true, and they chose not to. And the ironic cherry on the top of all of this is that in this email sent to about 1,000 employees and to local pastors and leaders, it's the Ramsey organization that is sharing incorrect information when they referred to Bob as unemployed or a freelance reporter. At that time of that email, Bob was employed by the Religion News Service and had 20 years of experience in journalism. He was and still is one of the most highly respected religion journalists in the country. So next I reread the main RNS article. And everything reported in that article comes straight from something Dave has said publicly or statements made specifically by people like me who shared their experiences and their names, or information that came from recordings and court filings and emails. The history of the company is mentioned. That's all true. The fact that they recently moved into a new multi-million-dollar building, also true. The fact that thousands of churches have hosted FPU classes, that COVID-19 added stress to their organization, that Ramsey demanded unquestioning loyalty and fired people at a moment's notice. All true. Other comments like former employees claimed it felt like a cult and that they weren't consistent in how they enforced their stated core values. Not a single one of these things has failed to hold up to scrutiny. My assumption is that the biggest concern Dave had with this article was the reporting on the fact that leadership was aware of the core values failures by Chris Hogan and chose to keep him anyway. Bob also embedded in the article the audio of an employee meeting in which Dave assured everyone in May of 2019, which was long before this article, that there was really nothing substantial to worry about in regard to Hogan, and that it was mostly rumor and innuendo. Bob's reporting referenced documentation that Ramsey was aware before that May 2019 meeting, and that it was not merely rumor and innuendo. 4 years after this article was published, I don't see anything in Bob's reporting that wasn't true. Instead, we've learned from documents turned over by Ramsey Solutions during the discovery process for a lawsuit they are involved in that in August of 2018, a board member referred Chris to a divorce attorney. That reputable third-party sources confirmed that he had admitted to infidelity. And we found out that in January of 2019, the husband of a woman Chris had been having an affair with called and told Dave. All of that happened before the meeting in which Dave declared to the entire company that any question about this situation was simply rumor and innuendo. So, 4 years later, I can confidently say Bob's reporting held up, and Ramsey's comments have not. Ramsey Solutions doesn't take up as much space in my head these days. I'm glad for that. I've prayed for so many people who worked there to leave, and most of the folks on my list have. But there are still hundreds of employees who drive to the Ramsey campus every workday and pay their bills with the paycheck they earn there. Most of them are good people who believe in the mission of the company and are doing good work. I hope for their sake the culture is better these days. I hope for their sake Dave and the rest of the leadership team are kind, effective, honest people who act with integrity even when it might cost them. I still have questions I'd love to ask some current and former employees who are part of the process of pushing Nathan out and standing by when he was misrepresented and maligned. Maybe someday those questions will be answered. These days when I drive down the highway and see the building, I pray that the good work will be honored, that people of integrity will be protected, and that any abusive, unhealthy things will be brought to the light. And I feel proud of my husband that 5 years ago, he did one of the most brave things I've ever seen. And I feel proud of myself that 4 years ago, I was willing to say the truth in the hopes it might help just one person. I feel confident it has. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. It has felt good to look back and also to look forward to this year. Next week, I'll be sharing a conversation with a friend about a classic Christian book, and we're going to ask if it held up. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of it, and you'll learn more about that next week. So I look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next week.